All right, folks, welcome back into the newest edition of The Last Word on Sports Media Podcast for this Tuesday. I'm merely the somewhat capable host, TJ Reeves. He is my co-host, Mike Gill of The Mike Gill Show, who is in Atlantic City with 97.3 ESPN, the radio affiliate in the greater Philadelphia market. We love chopping it up, and this is the extended version of what we do. On Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, if I have that straight, we do the daily, where you get your news, you get maybe a news item or two, something that's going on, a couple of takes. This is the extended version here tonight. So, Mike, good to be back with you as we're live on the feed and all the social media platforms. We've got a guest coming up that I'll tell you about. We got no shortage of subject matter. Netflix is smashing ratings in a good way for the Jake Paul-Mike Tyson fight. Disaster on the technical side that we'll get into. Smashing ratings, I'll use that phrase again, for the NFL and that Chiefs-Bills game. A lot to go over, including this inside the NBA deal with a guest coming up. Mike, how you feeling?
Feeling all right. Better than the broadcast was on Friday night for the Mike Tyson, Jake Paul. But I wish, we had the same viewership that they did.
It's incredible what the audience is. We'll get into that in a couple of moments. Again, if you're seeing us, thank you for finding us on Mike's Twitter handle, Mike Gill Show, my Twitter handle at Buck Sideline Guy. I'll be with the Buccaneers as they play the New York Giants on Buccaneers Radio with Gene Deckerhoff and Dave Moore. I'm headed to the Meadowlands, Mr. Gill, for that game. Whatever's going to happen with that game this weekend. We'll talk a lot of NFL on this podcast. You could also find this on Mike's YouTube page, Mike Gill Show YouTube page. And if you're only hearing us in podcast form, come find the video. But if you're seeing us, it's a podcast as well. Last Word on Sports Media Podcast out in full form Tuesdays. So come find that wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spreaker, Spotify. And we love the extended version, guests, etc. Again, Joe Flint, the guy that broke the story about inside the NBA being traded to Disney, ABC, ESPN. He will be with us in just a few minutes here on this pod. I had a chance to talk with Joe on Monday. We had to make the schedules work. You'll hear that interview and how he broke the story. We kind of go into that detail, Mike Gill, in a couple of moments. So we'll get to that, but there's no shortage of other subjects, including the massive audience for Netflix and the Paul Tyson fight. Pick it up from there. And I know we'll knock some things about it, but you cannot knock the amount of audience, even if the product wasn't stellar with a 58-year-old Mike Tyson, Mike Gill.
Yeah, the fight itself was obviously subpar. I don't think I don't know what people's expectations were. My expectations wasn't to watch, this Mike Tyson vintage fight where he was going to be shocking in all people. What I think most people, maybe not, I think people were looking for the nostalgia of Tyson with the entrance and, just kind of getting those goosebumps of him coming down, walking that aisle one more time. And then whatever happened in the ring. Now, whatever ended up happening in the ring has started all sorts of, was it staged? Was Tyson holding back? Was Jake Paul holding back? Which made for a very clunky fight. But what was more clunky was, in my opinion, the production and the broadcast. It just fell completely flat. It was not good. It wasn't good. There was glitching from a lot of people all over. I did not experience the glitching, so I can't really speak to how that altered people's ability to see the show, the fight. But the broadcast team itself, I don't know where they just threw these people together. Rosie Perez with Mauro Ranallo and Roy Jones Jr., Cedric the Entertainer with Lennox Lewis and Evander Holyfield and Kate Scott. I don't know, did they throw it darts and just pick names out? I don't know how they came up with this. Roy Jones didn't offer much at all. Rosie Perez actually might have offered more than he did. Mauro's solid in the job he did, but it almost felt like I felt bad for him because he was kind of stuck with what he had. I thought the production was wonky. Correct me if I'm wrong. The production company is Jake Paul's production company, correct?
I believe they were largely responsible for putting it together. and they had consultation with others. And again, he's had 2 or 3 of these on pay-per-view, et cetera. So they had one this summer in Tampa, where I am, where, again, they were responsible for it. They picked the announcers, Todd Grisham, our bud, formerly with ESPN and now with DAZN. It was a DAZN pay-per-view, and Todd Grisham was on the call for that one. Mauro Ranallo is a fantastic play-by-play, blow-by-blow man. But again, you kind of threw this together, like you said, some technical problems. But the bigger technical problem was the buffering of the streams, the errors that hundreds of thousands and millions had as the co-feature ladies fight wore into the main event. The technical problems mounted as tens of millions of more people tuned in about 10:30 Eastern time Friday night, 11 Eastern time Friday night. It turns out that the women's fight had over 50 million different accounts that were streaming it at one point or another. The Tyson fight had over 60 million on average, over 65 million in the United States that were watching in the midnight hour, in the midnight half hour at the end of the fight and the post-fight. There were over 65 million accounts. That's not just people, Mike Gill. That is an incredible number. That is something that is only rivaled by the Super Bowl in terms of sports in North America. It's ridiculous how much audience that was for this. So they succeeded even through the technical problems. Do you believe, as I do, because they've got these Christmas Day NFL games coming up, including one of them having Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, which is a complete golden ticket for Netflix to have this on Christmas Day. I believe they were aware we're going to have problems. We're going to have technical problems with the streaming and with the errors. We just need to figure out where they are, how bad it is, how many more servers we need, how much more bandwidth we need. I think they were, in some ways, using the boxing here as a guinea pig. Do you buy that? What's your thought, real quick?
Well, a couple things. One, remember, the number that is out there is internal numbers from Netflix. So take it with a grain of salt, I guess. That's number one. These are not Nielsen ratings. They're not a rated streaming service. So they're throwing this number out there. Also, remember, that number is global. It is not United States. So 60 million people in the U.S. did not watch this fight. It was 60 million people, according to Netflix, across the globe. Not to say that those numbers aren't impressive. So the question becomes, 60 million people from all over the globe, will Christmas Day games get more than 60 million people watching at one time?
That's a great question. And again, let me clarify, that's 60 million accounts. They don't measure it as people.
Households.
You would have, right, households. You would have to think that it's like a person and a half or 2 people per household. So it's still a ridiculous number, whatever it was worldwide. And I think I saw Netflix has over 250 worldwide subscribers, not just in the United States, not just in North America. I think I also saw where over 55% of any screens that were on TV, computer streaming, anything, 55 share was this fight on Friday night. So to your question, can they get to 40 million on Christmas Day accounts or streams? Can they get to 50 million? I think realistically, yes. I don't know that they get to 60 million or more on Christmas after. Maybe they do. For Netflix and the preamble to the NFL.
Yeah, and the question is, what is the threshold? Is it 30 million that causes the problems? Is it 35 million? Is it 20 million? I definitely think this was a dry run for Netflix to try to see how much they could handle, what they can do in a situation where that many people are jamming into the servers at one time, and what do we need to do to up that by Christmas? Now, keep in mind, Beyonce is doing the halftime of the big game of that day, so you're going to have added people who are going to get to see this concert for free that are going to be jamming in there. So
of course
they have to do whatever they have to do. I don't know what that entails to get
we've seen during the Super Bowl, the concert may get a higher number for that 15 minutes, that 10 minutes than the actual game gets, because in recent years the Super Bowl, I know with Rihanna a couple of years ago, that was the case. It got a better audience than the overall game got for that Super Bowl. So you make a great point. And I just go back to, were they ready? I saw somebody leak the internal memo from the CEO, what a surprise, of Netflix, who was basically saying to the employees, we didn't have our best night. I'm paraphrasing here. We need to be more prepared. This is a monumental audience night for us, but we've got to be more prepared, et cetera, et cetera. Stay tuned. They've got about 5 weeks to figure it out for the NFL doubleheader on Christmas Day.
And do you think the NFL got together with them to put that statement together?
Well, and the other thing, and this is interesting too, because we talked about it again on a brother podcast and show, the Big Fight Weekend podcast feed, where my colleague Dan Rayfield is with me, who is obviously the number one boxing insider and media personality in this country and has been for the last 20 plus years. And he brought up a great point, which is boxing doesn't have a league office like Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA. You're not answerable to Roger Goodell and the NFL in boxing for something like the problems they had Friday. I mean, you have to believe the NFL at the highest level, including Goodell, they're knocking on the door figuratively of Netflix saying, guys, we got to make sure that we don't have anything like that. Maybe some people, occasional people might have a problem, but we can't have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people that can't see the game because of streaming problems. So I think that's a very valid point. Boxing's not organized enough. They don't have a league office, Mike Gill.
Yeah, well, that's the fact that Mike Tyson fighting at 58 years old is the best boxing event that you could put out there. It tells you the problems that sport has, but I don't think that's breaking any news. Thanksgiving numbers. This is from Austin Karp. They have 25 million is the high water mark there. Is Thanksgiving a bigger football viewing day than Christmas?
That's a great question. And I don't know if the 25 million, didn't the Cowboys and one of their games the last couple of years have 35 or 40 million? And again, it's now measuring out of home, so that's different. I think it's a great point. Would Thanksgiving be a higher rated day than Christmas Day? We're about to find out.
Actually, the tweet from Austin Karp was the last time the Lions outrated the Cowboys. They had 25.3 million. The Jets-Cowboys game did 25 million. That was in 2007. But that gives you a ballpark of what number.
And we got to look. I want to say, and you can maybe look while we're talking, Cowboys, Commanders like last year, maybe Cowboys, Giants the year before. One of those got like 35 or 40 million. But again, you're now measuring out of home the last 2 or 3 years. You can't tell me that 15 years ago in 2009-ish, you can't tell me 20 years ago in 2004-ish, if you were measuring out of home when there was a much larger TV audience then, no Netflix, no YouTube, streaming services didn't exist back in those days, that you wouldn't have seen 40, 45 million or more if you're measuring out of home with the portable people meter. But the numbers are the numbers, and you bring up a great point. Will Thanksgiving be more than Christmas? That's Mike Gill, TJ Reeves with you. It's the Last Word on Sports Media podcast. If you're only hearing us, come find the video show. We're on the video feed here tonight. Coming up in a moment or two, we're going to hear from Joe Flynn of the Wall Street Journal. He broke the story on the Inside the NBA pregame show with Ernie Johnson, Kenny Smith, Charles Barkley, and Shaq, headed to Disney, ABC, ESPN, and Mike. I'm just going to tee it up. You're going to love how all of it evolved Friday into Saturday and what he had to do to go into scramble mode to confirm the story and get it out there, the nuts and bolts, which we love in sports media, of how he got it in the Wall Street Journal's website and what they were working on. Joe will have that in a few moments. By the way, speaking of audience, they've just released on Tuesday afternoon the audience for that Chiefs-Bills game. Go ahead and share it. It was massive.
Yeah, 31 million on that game. It's the biggest regular season non-Thanksgiving game for CBS since 2007, and that was a Brady Manning game going back to that time. So Mahomes, Allen, Brady, Manning, and 31 million on just a Week 11 Sunday 425 game, which 425 is the highest rated window in an NFL weekend. Yes.
And they had a massive lead in. I saw where the Steelers-Ravens game, Ian Eagle and Charles Davis doing that as the first game that most of the country saw. We saw that in Florida. I don't know what you saw. I would assume you saw it in the
We
Northeast.
did get
and
that
the
game here.
All right,
Yes.
most of the country got that, and it had nearly 20 million watching Steelers Ravens, and that was the highest rated early game on CBS going back some 25 years or more. That they had a great lead in. Again, we qualify. You're measuring out of home audience now to help those numbers, but they had a great lead in. And again, that was the only game on CBS. There were 2 other Fox games that were on in other markets. It was Denver and Atlanta and the Seattle San Francisco games. So those games were primarily in the West, and in Atlanta you had another option, but there was no other game on CBS. And Nance and Romo rose to the occasion. I mean, we had wild finishes, starting with the Green Bay Chicago blocked field goal. Kevin Burkhardt, Tom Brady and company on the call. Yep. The Charles Davis Iron Eagle CBS number 2 crew had a tremendous finish with Steelers and Ravens, went right down to the final seconds. And then you morph that into this 4 p.m. game where the Bills finally, after an 8 game losing streak, I believe it is, to the Chiefs, finally beat them in the final minute. Everybody erupting in Orchard Park, New York. What a setting that is. And then a great a Sunday night comeback by the Bengals. And I don't know what that official number is going to be from NBC, but that comeback by the Bengals to tie the game up with the Chargers after being down by 21, that easily, because it's Los Angeles, that easily had to have, I'm going to say 17 or 18 million watching. I don't think it got anywhere near that Chiefs number with the Bills, but I think Sunday Night Football might have done 18 or 19 million just because of the comeback, the drama. Eventually, the Chargers won the game with a late touchdown after blowing a 21-point lead. So that you had nothing but, for about 12 hours, dramatic, big-time finishes in big-time markets. That's best case scenario for Roger Goodell and the NFL. Any other thoughts on any of that?
No, just want to see what that Cowboy number will be with another bad game, another bad showing by them. They're going to be on Thanksgiving. They also play your Buccaneers on a Monday night, and if the NFL
Sunday night. The Monday night game is the week before with the Bengals, and the Bengals are bad. But the problem is they have a promotional thing with the Simpsons that's tied into the broadcast of that game. So I don't think that game's going to get flexed. Even though the NFL and ESPN and Disney could potentially do that, they're not going to do that. But the next week is Buccaneers, Cowboys, and I think that's goodbye on Sunday Night Football. That'll go to a Fox local
I'll tell you,
window, and they got to pick another game.
The number for the game last night might say otherwise. If people tuned in to see them play, as bad as they are, they might just say, you know what? We're not pushing the Cowboys out because we know we'll get 20, 22 million.
If I'm not mistaken, your Eagles and Commanders rematch in the game in D.C., and that is a game that if Fox wants to protect it, they better use armored cars to protect it, because
the Eagles have a couple interesting situations. They do play Baltimore coming up. That's a 4:25 game, so that's not getting they're not going to CBS is not going to give that up. The 2 weeks later, they play Pittsburgh. It's a 4:25 Fox game. Both networks have the doubleheader national window, so it's a 4:25 Fox up against Bills Lions 4:25 CBS.
Wow. All right, so that's just a look at some of the numbers that are coming in the NFL. Again, staggering audience, and you mentioned the Thanksgiving games that are coming up as well that are going to be highly rated, and then these primetime games also. Why don't we get to our guest? Let's shift gears and talk NBA. You and I talked a lot about it on the daily podcast yesterday. The huge story for a year from now is the Inside the NBA show, Turner's iconic NBA pregame, halftime, postgame show for the last 20 years with Ernie Johnson, Kenny Smith, Charles Barkley. The last 10 years, they've added Shaquille O'Neal to the mix. That show is going to continue, but it's a wild story. They have traded it, Turner and Warner Brothers Discovery, to Disney. So let's find out more about that from the guy that broke the story, Joe Flint of the Wall Street Journal. Full disclosure here for the pod audience that's hearing us, the video audience that's about to see the interview with Joe. I talked with him on Monday. We tried Mike Gill to get the schedules to work. Could he join us live on Tuesday or not? He said, I need to do this now on a Monday evening. Joe is based in California, so we made the interview work. So let's go back to that conversation. This is about how the whole Inside the NBA deal went down from the guy with the Wall Street Journal that broke the story. Well, ever since I saw the story broken by Joe Flint of the Wall Street Journal, wait a minute, Inside the NBA is going to Disney slash ABC slash ESPN. I said, I got to track that rascal down. And it took a little doing, but we did it. We worked out East Coast, West Coast time zones. And here he is back on the Last Word on Sports Media podcast. Thank you for doing this because I have a feeling you have been requested a few times in the, the last couple of days after this. Good to have you. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so I am more concerned, and this audience is too, with the nuts and bolts of what you do. I love this. So, at what point did you begin to hear, wait a minute, Inside the NBA may not only continue, but it's going to continue on Disney? Was that middle of last week, end of last week, only on Saturday? I'm just curious.
Sure, I'll sort of walk you through a little. First, I mean, obviously been following this whole situation with the NBA rights, the deals with Amazon and NBCU and Disney and TNT kind of left out in the cold. And then TNT and their parent Warner Discovery sues the NBA alleging breach of contract. So certainly, been very involved in all the coverage of that, keeping tabs on it. And basically actually on Friday, I was working out at the gym, trying to have a peaceful workout. When some information came my way that a settlement was near, and it's obviously there's a lot of moving pieces with this settlement. So there's the whole Warner versus the NBA part, and then there's this side deal, which also I was made aware of on Friday, involving ESPN, involving Inside the NBA, and some Big 12 college football and basketball. And I on the one hand, they were two separate things, but I don't think one could happen without the other. I think there was a lot of sort of three-way conversations, or at least this one, NBA's talking to Warner, Warner's talking to Disney. Are we all on the same page? So the original quote unquote plan, if you really want to know how the sausage gets made, is I poke around as quietly as I can, trying to confirm some stuff without necessarily tipping the hand. And it's only Friday, and I don't know for sure if this is done or not. And basically, learned that it's likely, to be wrapped up by Monday. So to be totally candid, I'm thinking, okay, I got to get up very early on Monday. Maybe I started writing a story on Friday, anticipating publishing something on Monday, and hopefully, being first. And so Saturday evening, much to my chagrin, I got to throw, give him some credit. Bill Simmons, he tweets something vague, very vague, but he does tweet that, oh, I'm hearing NBA and Warner are kind of nearing a deal, and he does say maybe the show Inside the NBA could go to ESPN. Again, vague, not specific about anything, not saying it's a done deal, just rumblings. But I knew, I mean, someone like Bill Simmons, who has, a huge, much bigger Twitter following than I'll ever have, okay, he just shined a spotlight on this. And I had to reach out to my editors and say, we can't sit on this anymore.
We can't wait till Monday, right?
Right. Can't wait till Monday. Sorry, we got to go now. And then I got to make all the calls, because here's the thing, and I'm not knocking it. Everyone has different worlds they live in. And I know this, maybe you'll hear it and say, no, that wasn't true. But my understanding is Bill didn't call Warner. Bill didn't call Disney. I'm not saying that maybe some folks at those companies didn't talk to them, but when the Wall Street Journal is writing something, we have to knock on the front door. We may have sources inside companies or leagues telling us things, but we have to knock on the front door with the communications people and say, this is what we're hearing. This is what we're writing. Do you have a comment? A lot of other people in the sort of blogosphere, the, Xosphere, I would say Twitter sphere, but, the Xsphere, whatever you want to call it, don't necessarily have to sort of play by those old, boring, traditional rules that folks like me still live on and have reputations based on that. But so I had to do all that stuff too, and get stuff, and work with my my editors and jam a story out. And so it went out a few hours later. Again, we're pros. We move, we have editing process, everything else. It's not like, oh, I just press a button and boom, there it is. I mean, we hurry. And then it went up, and it really did catch fire. And even to his credit, Bill Simmons gave me a retweet, which then
There
suddenly
we go.
meant my story was being read by a lot of people. And it was very nice. Everyone gave us credit for breaking it, except someone at The Athletic who writes about TV media business, Andrew Marsh.
Uh-huh.
Marshon, that might
We're
be his
still
name. I don't
are
know.
we still waiting on the attribution?
We're
Are we
still
still
waiting. Apparently the New York Times, the way they wrote it is, we've heard. And I'm like, well, you heard it from me writing it. But I'm being a little more candid here than
I understand.
that's how I felt. I'm like, wait a minute. AP, CNN, Washington Post, Reuters, all these other places can give the Journal
Yeah,
credit.
it's
And
like a phrase or a sentence. The Wall
yeah,
Street Journal was the first to report this. That's
yes,
it.
exactly.
I
It's
would
not a
prefer that
question.
they go ahead and tag you and say Joe Flint,
Right.
media writer
Maybe
of the Wall Street
yeah,
Journal, was the first. But that's okay if they just got the Wall Street Journal part. But good,
exactly.
good on you.
Exactly.
Good on you
But
for what you were able to do with finding that out. And so the first natural follow-up is, you just alluded to it. How, in your reporting, how much do you think this was brokered by the NBA saying, let's find a solution that keeps Warner happy? Wait a minute, we're going to make ESPN happy, and the lawsuit goes away. How much do you think the NBA was involved in helping broker this? Or maybe not that much at all. I'm just curious, in this lawsuit being dropped, and at the same time, ESPN gets the Inside the NBA show.
I mean, I'm just now speaking just on I'm just offering my take out. This is not based on any,
Sure.
well, it's based on a teeny bit of knowledge, which I can get into in a little bit. But I think a lot. I think the league appreciated the value of Inside the NBA. I think they recognize that it's a great platform that promotes its games and its product, and is one of those shows that really, there aren't many shows or broadcasters that people tune into just to see what they're going to say. And that show with Barkley, with Shaq, with Ernie, Kenny, it's one of them. So I do think there was a desire to hopefully find a home for that. I mean, sure, could it have stayed on TNT? I mean, look, for years, every network in the world has now had the Inside the NFL, and none of them actually have the NFL. HBO, Showtime, now it's
True.
on the CW.
True.
But nonetheless, you really want to have, if you're Turner, you want to have the NBA if you're going to air Inside the NBA. So this is, the next best thing. They are licensing the show to ESPN. They still own it. It's still their production. All their people will stay making the show. But they also then, get some money from Disney and ESPN and ABC, wherever they put it on. I'm sure it'll be on both before big games and things of that nature.
It is interesting. The Big 12 football and basketball games that obviously Warner Brothers is interested in programming, interested in getting some more games, that is part of this trade. I've joked it's not the first trade for a broadcaster. Even in recent history, Al Michaels was still under contract with Disney, had actually, I believe, Joe Flint of the Wall Street Journal. I love having him here with us on the Last Word on Sports Media podcast. Again, he was the first one, despite whatever else you might see on social media, to have actual details, quotes, and a long-form story Saturday night on this deal with this brokered deal with Inside the NBA, Ernie Johnson, Kenny Smith, Charles Barkley, and Shaq, now going to Disney and ABC, not this season, but next season. So I love having him here. But interesting that the Big 12 was involved in this, because frankly, Warner Brothers, TNT, they need programming, especially in the fall, in the winter. So in some ways, they got something in this trade in the form of live games from an expanding conference that has interest. It's not professional sports, but they got something. But back to Al Michaels was traded for like extra video rights for the Ryder Cup, to Disney, and Oswald the Rabbit, the rights to Oswald the Rabbit, right,
I
Joe?
think we
That was
remember
part.
Oswald the Rabbit more than anything else. But
So
yeah,
that, I mean, that we have precedent of a trade like this before. It's fascinating, right?
yeah, no, and it happens, and certainly there's lots of maybe not of actual human beings, but there's of course a lot of bartering
Sure.
and trading that goes on in the industry all the time. I mean, just case in point. I mean, we'll see what happens, but the ABC just Disney, ABC, and Hulu just did a big deal for the Grammy Awards, and CBS still has the show for the next 2 years now. I talked to some folks at CBS, and they would be perfectly happy to maybe get out of it a little early if someone, and I'm sure, if they were to work something out,
Right.
there's always something someone else wants to make a deal happen.
Well, and we've seen this too with networks going to production companies. For example, American Idol was such a long-running show on Fox while we cross over to a different genre of entertainment. And Fox didn't want to pay for it, didn't see the value in it anymore. And Disney ABC said, well, wait a minute, we'll put that on. We'll take that audience. We don't get anything
Right.
like that out of our reality shows. So yeah, they now have done this several years running where they still have continued American Idol. So it happens that way. Now, interesting, as you and I are doing this, again, full disclosure, Joe is with me, and it's still an evolving story. Both ESPN, Disney, and Turner announced it on Monday, but you put a social media tweet out there that it is not all completely done with all the components of all the members of the Inside the NBA show. Still some details to be worked out. It will probably all be worked out, but not completely done here on these guys continuing long term. Is that fair? Is that accurate?
Well, that's certainly the belief of some of the agents. I did not, to be full disclosure, I did not talk to the agents for everyone, but I talked to a couple agents for some of the talent on that show. And I should preface this with, anytime an agent believes there is a window to renegotiate a deal, they will take it. And in this case, the argument would be, hey, my client's on a show he signed to do with TNT in front of basketball games on TNT. Now you're licensing him to ESPN. Well, that's a whole other thing. We got to talk about that. I do think they will, the sense I got from the people I was talking to was that this will get done. It'll all be worked out. But I think, there are some, it's interesting because I do think there are some folks trying to, throw a little gasoline on
Interesting.
and see. But ultimately, I do believe it would get done. I have to believe that Disney wouldn't have, done a deal. I'm sure they have an out if for some reason something doesn't take place that should, but I'm sure that they feel pretty confident this is it, or else what are they doing? Really, just licensing a name? But they're not.
That's right. And they want the show, and they want the participants of that show. Fascinating too that this is out there as well. Ernie Johnson and Charles Barkley and Kenny Smith, I believe they are making history in that they're already doing Final Four coverage from Turner, which is airing not only on Turner but also airing on CBS, NCAA tournament, and then Final Four. Now, obviously, when TBS broadcasts the college basketball men's championship that we're talking about, they're the studio show. When CBS is doing it, they still have Greg Gumbel, Clark Kellogg, Seth Davis typically doing it. But now Ernie, Charles, and Kenny will make history because they will also do the NBA Finals. And fascinatingly, they're going to do it while not even working for Disney and ABC. They're essentially still working for Turner on lease, on loan. Yeah. It's wild. It's wild that show for both the college basketball Final Four and their brand, those guys are now also going to do the NBA Finals eventually as well, pregame, halftime, postgame.
No, I'm look. I'm sure that if Amazon and NBC could convince Barkley to do them as well, no one, he'd be on 5 networks,
right,
or however many. I mean, that's just. I mean, they're such powerful personalities, and few people have that cachet. But Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I'm thinking back too to Tim McCarver, because there was a time in the 80s and the 90s, and you and I go back a little bit. We're older. I'm not saying we're old, but McCarver did the World Series working for ABC. He then did the World Series working for NBC and the Baseball Network, if I'm not mistaken, and then did the World Series for Fox. He just kind of traveled. Whoever had the World's, or CBS, he had it ABC, CBS, and then for Fox, he traveled with the World Series to whatever network was eventually doing it, and then was at Fox forever with Joe Buck, the late Tim McCarver, on that. Okay, fascinating that all of this is going to go into play. So this leads me to one other component on this. What do we hear about NBC and what they might do, and even to a lesser extent here, what Amazon Prime might do for pregame, halftime, and postgame, as you just alluded to? They may have been in play for Inside the NBA to be on one of those. It's not the case. Have we heard anything on what they might do for pregame coverage? Do you think it's that significant up next to Inside the NBA being the standard? What have you heard? What do you think, Joe?
Well, I do think they were, like, I will say they've been watching this whole situation very closely, and let's assume that the Inside the NBA team, all of them, do move with the show. Well, then I think they may be. I do think they had some thoughts, like, could they get a Barkley? And Barkley has a long relationship. The head, the top exec at NBC on the TV and sports side is Mark Lazarus, who used to work at Turner for a lot of years, very tight with Barkley and those guys. So I do think there was some hope there, and I'm sure. Look, if there's still a little teeny crack in the window for them to dive in and try to do something to I don't want to say sabotage, but disrupt the plans in place. I'm sure that they will, be hauling back a big Brinks truck. Otherwise, they will look for talent, and it's funny. I mean, look, the game. Some people you tune into, yes, but most people tune to watch the game. So I'm not saying the pregame show isn't important. Clearly, it is in this case, but I do think they might be better off, I do think, to try to build something organically, and that may be
right.
They have to do now.
Mike Tirico, by the way, at one point was hosting, I believe, the NBA countdown stuff on ESPN, as well as calling games. Tirico is slated to be one of the main voices on NBC. I wonder if it's him. Maria Taylor briefly did it, right, Joe, just recently for like a season before jumping to NBC. Maybe she's a candidate. Listen to me playing amateur network executive on the podcast. I don't know what they're going to do. We'll see. But listen, great work, great hustle with this. Suffice to say, there's going to be more to write about this and more to figure out coming up, including what NBC and Amazon do to fill it out. So we need to stay locked in with you, the media writer for the Wall Street Journal, my friend.
Keep tabs. I'm one of many, but sometimes we get lucky and we have our day in the sun. So I
love it, and I'm glad that I can keep shining some of the sun on him. Again, follow him on social media at JB Flint from the Wall Street Journal. Love the insight on all of these things. If you let me bother you again down the road, I'd love to bother you again whenever it comes up. But as soon as I saw this, I went into chase mode, like Sunday, Monday. How do I find Joe and say kudos to you and get you on from the inside out? I'm just verifying that in the 14 minutes that we've been talking, you don't have another text updating the story. You have not gotten a text. Nothing new at this moment.
I left my phone at my desk, so I'm in the dark.
I love it. You'll check back on that. Joe, thank you. I know you have been requested somewhat here over the last 24 to 48 hours. Thank you for making time for me on the Last Word on Sports Media podcast.
All right, anytime.
So there you go. And by the way, so now you see a similar setup. You can tell that was yesterday again, if you're with us on the video audience, because TJ's now in blue, including the Memphis Tiger hat when I was in red yesterday. And for the audio audience that's hearing us, again, he did fantastic work. Little dig there at Andrew Marchand and others. Again, attribution's not a difficult thing for any of them to say where you got it and who had it first on a big story like that, which he clearly did. All right, Mike, your thoughts, because I got to have that conversation there with Joe. You just heard all of that. Your thoughts on how, I mean, the behind the scenes on He's trying to have a Saturday afternoon in California, and suddenly I'm going to work because this is going to get out. Somebody's going to find it. I'm ahead, and I want to stay ahead with my story. Pick it up, Mike, with your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, how it all kind of started on a weekend like that. You don't see stuff like that happen on the weekend. And, it's on the tails of the Netflix debacle. It's almost like, what's the thought process of how this trickled its way out on a Saturday like that to where, bam, the next thing you know, look, quite frankly, the biggest studio show in sports is making a move. And the whole thing, it goes with the lawsuit. By the way, Warner Brothers, Discovery, NBA, they agreed to a deal in which they're going to be able to do some stuff. I think it has to do with highlights, Bleacher Report, having some highlights, stuff like that. And then, look, the big thing to me is that ESPN is savvy enough to say, we're going to get out ahead of this. We're going to make this call. Jimmy Pitaro calls Silverwasser and basically says, look, what are you doing? You're suing the NBA? Come on, what are we doing here? Let's make this work. You guys produce the show. Let's not touch the show. We'll air it. And there we go. TNT Sports exists still. They have they have programming that they need. We got stuff for you for TNT Sports. Here you go. Have a couple Big 12 football games. Have a couple Big 12 basketball games. And then add that to your portfolio. It's a win-win for both sides. I think it's well done, and quite frankly, will probably be one of the sports media stories of 2024.
Oh, I think so. The trade, it did not involve a cartoon rabbit, Oswald the rabbit, being traded
anyway.
down
Not yet.
Michaels.
Maybe they could trade the Simpsons stuff for the Dallas game so we can get that off the TV for Monday in a couple weeks.
Listen, we've been here for a little bit. What else do we need to cover on the Last Word on Sports Media podcast? And again, thanks to Joe Flint. JB Flint is how you find him on social media. Find him in the Wall Street Journal as their media writer, not just sports, but all their different media. And he broke that story on Inside the NBA. But go ahead. What else?
Speaking of the NBA, ratings are down 3% on TNT. They're down 28% on ESPN. And I don't know if that says that Shaq, Charles, and Kenny and Ernie are that powerful, but that's a big discrepancy. 3% versus 28%. Overall, NBA numbers are down. I'm going to talk more about it tomorrow on the Daily Podcast with Michael McCarthy from Front Office Sports. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Netflix debacle and a couple of other things that he's covering. He does a great job at Front Office Sports. So I'm going to have him on tomorrow on the Daily Podcast. But those numbers, 3% at TNT, 28% down on ESPN.
And isn't it factored in that the ESPN games are also on Friday night, which is not a great viewing night, and so that has something to do with it. And really, in fairness, their audience has been dwindling, including post-crazy 2020 year. And another component here is their line of demarcation usually begins Christmas Day, and the audience usually picks up starting Christmas Day, and then the network games on ABC help. So maybe we listen to me kind of giving them a little pass. Maybe we wait and see, is the audience still down in early January, for example, for all
Well, everybody has a theory, right? Too many three-pointers.
What are you buying? What are you buying? You're big into the NBA and the greater Philly market. What are you buying as a plausible explanation?
Well, I'll tell you what, Philly's 2-11 right now. That story that Shams Charania, give him a hat tip, breaks a really big story today for ESPN. This is a topic we can get into maybe on another podcast, which is a closed-door meeting. How does it get out? Who gets it out to Shams? Joel Embiid gets called out by a teammate, Tyrese Maxey, who says, you're constantly late for everything, and it needs to stop. How does that get out there? I have my theory, I would imagine. Shams is a newsbreaker.
It gets out there because Maxey or his agent or somebody else's agent who doesn't like Embiid or a teammate that doesn't like Embiid put it out there. Obviously.
Right. Well,
got it to him, right?
Is a newsbreaker. Where does Shams get a lot of his information from? Rich Paul, who's the agent for Tyrese Maxey.
There you go.
But
there you go.
Hey, listen, everybody is wondering how this got out there, but that's another, sports media story. Is the national media guy gets that story, the local guys kind of get left in the cold, and now they have to ask the tough questions of what was said in there. What are you going to do about this?
All right, but just real quick, we bring it back to what we're talking about. So the Sixers aren't very good, but you've got the Cavaliers, who are a tremendous story. What are they, 15-0? And tonight,
as we're live right now, they're playing the Celtics in an NBA Cup game. You thought these NBA Cup games, does anybody care?
Well, and again, that's a huge moment for, okay, is the audience going to jump a little bit here? We got a great storyline, unbeaten 15-0 team, defending champion Celtics. If this audience doesn't see a jump of a few 100,000 or maybe 1 million to watch it, then maybe that is a concern, and maybe it's a bigger thing on, because the NFL is so huge, college football is so huge, that the NBA is kind of lost in this until we at least get to January and they start to pick up. We'll see. We'll see what happens on that. All right, what else?
The NBA Cup games did well last year in the ratings. And by the way, the NBA Cup finals, LA, Indiana, Vegas, did about 4 million people, which is about a Christmas Day game. So we'll see if, as you said, Christmas Day, which, by the way, the NFL plays on Christmas Day. So
yes,
even
they do.
The ABC quadruple header or 5 games, whatever they play on Christmas Day, that gets knocked to the side. So
can I interrupt? How much does the NBA second year of the in-season tournament, the Cup, is some of the novelty worn off? Last year, it was the new shiny thing. That's another variable. Who knows?
They better hope not. They're hoping this thing progressively gets more popular as it catches on more. I think it's done very poorly. You want to make something of this? Make it the whole month. The month of December is NBA Cup month. I think they should do.
And I'm not sure if we lost Mike there. I heard, and I think we did. He'll jump back in a second. He said, I think we should do probably like the semifinals or the finals in and around Christmas would be the logical follow-up for that. So, again, we'll see if the NBA audience does jump a little bit here or not for the for this NBA Cup. I was saying in your absence, because you didn't hear it, were you building to they should have like the semifinals or the championship on Christmas Day and build to that?
Okay, so the groups to me should not depend on the conference. If you're a West Coast or an East Coast and you're in the same group, you're in the same group. Make it who's the best team in the league, not East versus West. Differentiate it from the NBA Finals. Why do I need to see who's going to win the East versus the West in the NBA Cup? I'm getting that answer possibly in April. Who's the best team? It could be Boston against Cleveland. It could be LA against Sacramento. But make it a true who's the best team in the league. Culminate it on either Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, something like that, and make it the whole month of December so that when you play in December, it's NBA Cup month. Doesn't matter what conference you're in, whatever group you land in, and at the end of the day, who are the 2 best teams in the league?
Fair enough. Let's get out of here because we've been here for a while on the announcers for this weekend. We always like to do this for all of the football and college football with only 2 more regular season weekends. We'll go over that real quick before the championship Saturday on December 7th. So what do you have for me to set the table later this week off the pod here?
Yeah, so CBS interesting this week. We talked about this on Friday during the Daily Show. I listened to a podcast. Jimmy Traina had Romo and Nance on, and they had kind of divulged that they were not going to be on the schedule this week for Week 12. They have the week off because they're doing Thanksgiving and then the Sunday Eagles-Ravens game. So they are not on this Week 12 schedule. It's not a great CBS schedule. Ian Eagle, Charles Davis have Chiefs-Panthers. Andrew Catalan, Tiki Barber, Jason McCourty. They've got Bucks and Giants. So your buddy.
So
Tiki
I will be with them in the Meadowlands. Yes.
Patriots, Dolphins, Spiro Diaz, and Adam Archuleta. Titans and Texans. Tom McCarthy, Jay Feely, Ross Tucker, and then the 4:00 game is Kevin Harlan, Trent Dilfer. That is the Broncos and the Raiders. So no Nance and Romo this week. They get the week off because they're going to be doing, technically 2 games the following week. But I feel like the schedule itself was a little bit more of the reason why they got off. But good for them. They're the number 1 team. The Fox games, Dallas, Washington, Joe Davis and Greg Olson, Minnesota, Chicago, Kevin Kugler, Darryl Johnson, Lions, Colts, Kenny Albert, Jonathan Vilma. Your national game, the game of the week is Niners, Packers. That's Brady and Burkhart, and of course, Arizona and Seattle. It's going to be Adam Amin and Mark Sanchez.
So there's a second Fox game the late window, but that will probably only be in the West. And I would have to think that Packers 49ers, I don't know that it's going to get the $30 million that the Chiefs did with Patrick Mahomes against the Bills, but it might get in the 25, 27 million range for Green Bay, who's really good, and San Francisco that's got the stars. It's been in the Super Bowl a couple times in recent history. So let's see if that one does pretty well as the number one Fox game for the number one crew for this weekend. And college football, again, interesting. The big noon kickoff game is Ohio State hosting Indiana. Yeah. Indiana 10-0. Big Ten title game hopes kind of hanging in the balance for both teams. Who's going to end up playing Oregon? How about the Big Ten has been so confused by how many teams they have in the league and all the different scenarios. It took them 3 days to figure out on Tuesday afternoon, hey, by the way, Oregon's already qualified for the Big Ten title game. They didn't know. The results have been over since Saturday night late. They didn't know till Tuesday. Oregon can't finish any lower on tiebreakers than number 2, so they're in. Will Indiana or Ohio State be the one to join them? Again, Fox will be in Columbus for the big noon kickoff game. The rest of the slate,
by the way, game day.
Yeah, go ahead.
Game day is also there for that game
because it's the biggest game. Because in the SEC world for ESPN and Disney, that's Ole Miss, Florida early. It's Texas, Kentucky in the middle of the day, Alabama and Oklahoma in the primetime game. None of those games are stellar games. And what the CBS game is Penn State and Minnesota, 3:30 Eastern time. Again, not a stellar game. Good, not great. The interesting game is the NBC primetime game with Notre Dame and Army. Notre Dame is such a big Chicago market, Northeast market. Will that game maybe rival Ohio State and Indiana earlier in the day as the game of the night with Army undefeated, Notre Dame with one loss? That's huge. For NBC to have it in that slot, and who knew the Army game would be that big a deal in late November, but it is. Let's see what that number does, Mike, for Saturday.
Yeah, and by the way, the college football playoff projections just came out, and you got Boise State now into the top 4, and the BYU-Ohio State game is the first-round matchup. The winner would play Boise. Can you imagine a quarterfinal game? BYU, Boise State. I can't imagine the networks would be thrilled about that possibility. You got Alabama, Notre Dame. The winner would play Oregon. Georgia, Penn State. The winner playing Miami. Ole Miss and Indiana. The winner would play Texas. So I can't imagine Ole Miss.
You got a lot of brand names. You're going to have SEC and Big Ten brand names. And if you get Notre Dame in the mix, now it's interesting for how it's all going to play out. And Boise State would be that group of 5 team, the non-Power 4 conferences of the ACC, SEC, Big 10, Big 12. Boise State's in that position. Army could maybe get in that position. If Army upsets Notre Dame, if that maybe knocks Notre Dame out of the playoff. Would it maybe knock them all the way out of the playoff? I don't know. Notre Dame still has to play USC the final weekend. And then Army might slide in. The United States Military Academy at West Point could be in the college football playoff mix, the 12-team playoff. Stay tuned.
Yeah, by the way, Indiana, Ohio State, that's the big noon game. Very interested to see. These big noon games have been done well in the ratings. How does Indiana undefeated draw against Ohio State? And look, Indiana right now, they are ranked ahead, of they're not in the playoffs. Ohio State is 5, Indiana 7, but they're trying to jump ahead now. If they can beat Ohio State here, they would have to go into the top 4, you would think.
You would think. And again, they've never been 10-0 before. How about their coach, Kurt Cignetti, just got an extension that includes like $8.5 million a year to be the Indiana coach, which is incredible for that. And now we'll see what happens with that big noon game and with all the attention around it at Ohio State. I think we've pretty well covered it all here on this edition of the pod. Did we leave anything else out? Again, thanks to Joe Flint of the Wall Street Journal for being with us as well about the Inside the NBA story that he broke. Anything else, Mike Gill? Are we good in closing?
Nope. Tomorrow I'll have Michael McCarthy from Front Office Sports on the Daily Podcast. And we'll continue to take a closer look at this big trade and see if there's anything new that comes out over the next 24 hours, because it seems like there could be a little more things. By the way, Shaq is not signed to the deal. It seems like that's going to be a fait accompli, but keep that in mind.
And you heard Joe say the agents are saying, wait a minute, if we did a deal for my client, Barkley, Kenny Smith, even Ernie Johnson, to be on Turner, now we're doing something different on network TV with ABC. We might want a little more compensation to come our way. Who knows what the agents do with that? So it's fascinating. Many layers to the story. There's no doubt, my friend. Many layers to it. Mike Gill, great stuff. Follow him at Mike Gill Show. And again, his Sports Bash show is on 97.3 ESPN in the afternoons, 2 to 6 Eastern time in Atlantic City. I'm merely TJ Reeves. Follow me at Buck Sideline Guy. You've been locked in on the Last Word on Sports Media podcast on video or on the audio pod. We'll catch up with you again soon. Mike is back with the Daily on Wednesday.